Texas, December 1946. The war had been over for more than a year, but to Dr. Jonathan Reed, peace still sounded like bandages being unrolled. Every morning, before the hospital's new generator coughed awake, he would walk the corridor with a flashlight and the smell of ether and cedar polish following him. The Veterans Administration had reopened the place 3 months earlier, calling it Brazos County Memorial Hospital, a facility for injured servicemen, displaced civilians, and anyone who couldn't pay but still deserved to be saved. That last part, Reed had insisted on. He'd served as a battlefield surgeon in North Africa and Italy, patching together men from both sides when the Red Cross tents overflowed. His chest bore a medal. His sleep still bore the sound of scissors cutting open uniforms that never came off in time. Outside, Texas was healing. Cotton trucks rumbled down the road again. The cafe on Main Street had switched from ration cards to chalkboard menus. But inside the hospital, the past was piled in the corners. Crates of army surplus, rusted instruments, crumpled Red Cross paperwork that smelled like mildew and morphine. "Dr. Reed," a nurse called from the far end of the hall. "Supply truck's here. And a new translator from the War Department." "Translator?" Reed frowned, lowering his flashlight. "For who?" "Foreign patients, I think. They're sending displaced folks through the county clinics now. Europeans, former prisoners, farm workers." She shrugged. "Says he speaks German and English," Reed sighed. "Fine, bring him to Ward C after intake. We've got enough broken English in here to start a dictionary." Ward C had once been an isolation ward. Now it was a workshop of sorts. 2 local carpenters rebuilding cabinets, an army nurse cataloging what was salvageable, and Reed himself trying to turn ghosts into patients again. When the translator arrived, Reed didn't look up right away. He was bending over a wooden supply crate, sorting through scalpels dulled by rust. "Dr. Reed?" the man said quietly. His voice carried a trace of accent. Soft, deliberate, not quite local. "Over here," Reed said, setting a scalpel aside. "You're the interpreter?" "Yes, sir. Ernst Weiss. I was told you needed someone to help with German and maybe Polish." Reed straightened. The name struck something deep and half-forgotten. He looked at the man. Slender, maybe in his 30s. Coat too thin for the cold, eyes sharp but gentle. There was a pause. "You served?" Reed asked. "Yes," Ernst said. "In the Wehrmacht. Engineer Corps, captured in Tunisia, 1943. Reed's breath caught. Tunisia. He knew that place. He remembered a field tent near Sidi Bou Zid, sand blowing through the seams, a line of wounded prisoners under the pale sky. One of them, a young engineer shot through the leg, had refused morphine, saying, "Save it for the men who still believe they'll go home." "Did we—" Reed began, then stopped. "You were in the field hospital? The one near the olive grove?" Ernst's eyes lifted slowly. "Yes, I remember you. The American doctor with the cigarette behind his ear. You saved my leg." Reed exhaled like someone remembering a song he hadn't meant to hum again. "I remember you too." They stood there a long moment, the hammering of the carpenters filling the space between them. Finally, Reed said, "So now you're—" "Translating," Ernst nodded. "I stayed after repatriation. The church helped me find work with displaced persons. It's strange. After all that war, I am useful again because I can speak 2 tongues instead of firing 1 gun." Reed almost smiled. Useful's a good start. By evening, the translator had made himself indispensable. He spoke softly to the Polish refugee with a fractured arm, reassured a young German laborer who feared deportation, and somehow convinced the hospital cook to serve coffee past ration hours. Reed watched from the nurse's station, arms crossed. "Doesn't bother you?" one of the carpenters whispered. "Working with him?" "After all that?" Reed didn't look away. "The war's over," he said. "That's supposed to mean something." But when he lay in his quarters that night, the question followed him like a restless cough. Was it? The next week brought a cold front that froze the pipes and flooded Ward C. The men worked through the night with mops and buckets, their breath fogging the air. Ernst waded barefoot through the icy water, hauling boxes of medical supplies onto the tables. When the nurse begged him to stop, he just smiled. In Bremen, this would be called warm. Reed knelt beside him, holding one end of a soaked crate. "You should have let the others handle this." Ernst looked up, water dripping from his hair. "And miss a chance to feel alive?" That made Reed laugh despite himself. By dawn, the floor was clean again. They sat on overturned buckets, steam rising from the coffee in tin mugs. "I never thanked you properly," Ernst said quietly. "For Tunisia." Reed shook his head. "You thanked me when you lived. I thought you were saving me out of duty." "I was." Ernst met his eyes. "And now?" Reed took a sip of coffee. Now I'm trying to save a building. Duty hasn't changed, Ernst smiled. Maybe it has. In your eyes, it looks like forgiveness. 2 weeks later, the county issued new orders. Former POW laborers could assist with reconstruction of hospitals and schools if supervised by American veterans. It was bureaucratic mercy, but mercy nonetheless. Reed gathered his small staff in the lobby, sunlight cutting through the dust. "We'll take them," he said. "We need hands more than pride." By spring, the old East Wing was filled with the sound of hammers, laughter, and 3 languages trying to agree on the word for paint. When an American orderly refused to share tools with one of the German workers, Reed stepped in. "If you're going to hold grudges," he said, "you'll need both hands free, because forgiveness takes work." The room went silent. Then everyone went back to work. One afternoon, a delivery truck arrived with supplies from the Army's medical surplus. Reed and Ernst carried boxes into the storage room together. Inside, under a tarp, lay a battered wooden crate with faded letters. U.S. Field Surgical Unit, North Africa, 1943. Reed froze. He opened the crate. Inside were instruments he hadn't seen since the war. Bone saws, clamps, even a field notebook marked with his own initials. He pulled one out, a small brass hemostat, bent slightly at the hinge. Ernst's face changed. "That was mine," he said softly. "You used it to close the artery in my leg." Reed stared at it. "I thought it was lost." "I carried it for a year," Ernst said, "until they took our kits away in the camp. I never thought I'd see it again." Reed turned it in his hand. The metal caught the light like a memory polished by time. "Strange," he murmured. "The things that survive war." Ernst smiled faintly. "Sometimes it's the small tools. Sometimes it's people." By summer, the hospital had begun to feel alive again. The walls were painted, the gardens replanted, the children of nearby farmers came for vaccinations. The town's paper ran a headline. "Local veterans and former POWs joined to rebuild hospital." Reed read it over breakfast and felt something shift, something like pride, something like peace trying to remember its name. That afternoon, he found Ernst repairing a broken window in the maternity wing. Outside, the wind carried the smell of rain. "Looks like we might actually finish this place," Reed said. Ernst smiled. "Hospitals are never finished. They only keep beginning." Reed chuckled. "You sound like a preacher." "I sound like a man who was given a second life," Ernst replied. "I am just trying to use it well." The thunder rolled, low and distant. Reed turned toward the sound. "Then maybe we're both learning the same lesson." That night, lightning cut the sky open, and the hospital lights flickered out. Reed rushed to the children's ward, lantern in hand. The storm had blown the roof tiles loose. Rain poured through the ceiling. Ernst was already there, barefoot again, moving beds away from the leak. Together they worked until dawn, water streaming down their faces, laughter breaking through exhaustion. When the power finally returned, Reed looked at his friend, no longer a former enemy, no longer a patient, and said, "If forgiveness were surgery, we'd both be the patient and the doctor." Ernst grinned. "Then let's not close the wound too soon." Outside, the sun rose over the wet Texas fields. The new hospital wing gleamed faintly through the mist, its windows catching the light. Reed stood by the doorway, hands on his hips, watching the reflection spread across the grass. The war had ended a year ago, but for the first time, it truly felt like morning. Spring 1947, Brazos County Memorial Hospital, Texas. The red clay fields outside had turned green again, and the air smelled of wet pecans and disinfectant. Inside, the newly rebuilt hospital buzzed with quiet determination, a rhythm of typewriters, footsteps, and the steady hum of the sterilizer that refused to quit. Even when the lights flickered, Dr. Jonathan Reed stood by the main window, arms folded, watching the afternoon rain taper into drizzle. The new East Wing had finally opened. 2 wards, 1 lab, and a small children's unit. For the first time since the war, the hospital ran at full capacity. Ernst Weiss, the former POW turned interpreter, moved briskly down the hall, his notebook under one arm. His English had sharpened, his laughter more frequent. Most of the nurses liked him now. Even the veterans who'd once stiffened at his accent had come around after seeing his patience with the children. Reed smiled as he watched Ernst stop to fix a crooked picture frame in the corridor. "You'll straighten this whole building one detail at a time," he called out. Ernst grinned. "If it looks right, maybe it will start to feel right." By May, the hospital began to face its first true test. The nurses were the first to notice a high fever among the children, stiff necks, and sudden weakness in the limbs. The local doctor from Navasota confirmed their fear. Poliomyelitis, the county went on alert. Town meetings filled with panic and rumors. They brought it from Europe, some whispered. Those German workers at the hospital. Who knows what they carried with them? Reed heard the gossip himself at the diner one morning. Two ranchers at the next table were muttering about disease following the enemy. He set his coffee down, turned, and said calmly, "The only thing that came from Europe was courage, and we could use more of it." Then he left enough money for all 3 cups. That week, the first child was brought in from town. A 6-year-old girl named Mary Wallace, legs limp, eyes terrified. Reed worked through the night, trying to ease her breathing with ice packs and careful positioning. The local nurse on duty hesitated to call in Ernst. "He's not a doctor," she said, "and folks are already talking." Reed wiped his hands. "He's the only one who knows how to sterilize instruments properly in 3 languages. Call him." When Ernst arrived, he said nothing, just tied on an apron and began boiling surgical clamps. His hands moved with practiced calm. "She'll live?" he asked quietly. "She'll need an iron lung before dawn," Reed replied. "But we don't have one." Ernst thought for a moment, then said, "In Bremen, we used bellows and a bicycle chain." Reed frowned. "A what?" "A manual respirator. Give me tools, and I'll build one." Within an hour, they had cleared the small storage room. By lamplight, Ernst dismantled an old hospital pump, rigged the tubing, and attached a hand crank from a washing machine. When he started turning it, air flowed through the tube with a steady hiss. Reed bent to test the pressure, his face softening. "You just built the first working respirator in Brazos County." Ernst smiled faintly. "War teaches engineers strange things. Peace does too," Reed said. By morning, the child's breathing had stabilized. Reed and Ernst slept side by side in the empty ward, heads tilted against opposite walls, the handmade respirator still humming. When the girl's mother came to see her, she froze at the sight of the man tending the machine, a German accent softly explaining the device to a nurse. "You're letting him touch her?" the mother cried. Reed stepped forward, weary but steady. "Ma'am, that man kept your daughter alive through the night. If you need someone to thank, start there." The woman hesitated, tears trembling in her eyes. Finally, she whispered, "Then, thank you," Ernst nodded. "You do not have to. Just let her breathe." Word spread faster than the sickness. By the end of the week, the hospital was swamped with both patients and reporters. The Houston Chronicle sent a correspondent who described the story as a wartime miracle reborn in peace. But not everyone saw it that way. A local veteran named Pete Collier led a small protest outside the gates, holding a sign that read, "No enemy doctors in Texas." Reed stepped out to face him. The air was hot, the smell of tar heavy from the road. "Afternoon, Pete," he said evenly. "If you've got something to say, say it to me." Collier shifted, sweat glinting on his neck. "You've got a Nazi in there working on our kids." Reed's eyes flashed, but his voice stayed calm. "You're wrong. I've got a man who almost died for his country helping mine learn mercy." The veteran stared at him for a long moment, then spat on the ground and walked away. The sign clattered to the dirt. Ernst had watched the exchange from the doorway. "You did not have to defend me," he said. "I wasn't defending you," Reed replied. "I was defending what we're trying to build." Over the next month, the outbreak worsened. Reed barely slept. The wards filled with rows of children in splints, mothers weeping quietly by their bedsides. One night, near midnight, Reed found Ernst still in the lab. "Rewiring an oxygen pump. You should rest," Reed said. Ernst shook his head. "Not yet. The machine fails every 6 hours. I must make it stronger." Reed leaned against the doorframe. "You could have gone home, you know." "To Germany." "Yes," Ernst said softly. "But there, I would only be another scar. Here I can be part of the healing." Reed studied him. "You ever think about Tunisia? About what happened?" Ernst paused, then looked up. "Every day. I thought if I ever saw you again, I would not know what to say. And now?" "Now I know," Ernst said, his voice steady. "You saved my body. But tonight, maybe I save your faith." Reed smiled faintly. "You already have." By midsummer, the epidemic eased. The last patient discharged was little Mary Wallace, walking slowly with braces on her legs. When she reached Ernst in the hallway, she stopped, hugged his knees, and said, "Mama says you're my angel." Ernst knelt. "Tell her I'm just an engineer with good tools," the child laughed. 2 weeks later, the hospital held a small celebration. Not for the doctors, but for the volunteers who'd stayed through the crisis. The cafeteria tables were pushed together, the walls hung with paper garlands. Someone brought a phonograph, and for the first time in months the building heard music instead of coughing. Reed stood on a chair, holding up a small brass clamp. "See this?" he said. This clamp closed the artery of a German soldier in 1943. The same hands that made this tool just built the machines that saved American children. That's the full circle of medicine. He looked at Ernst. So tonight, before we celebrate, I'd like to give this back where it belongs. He stepped forward and pressed the clamp into Ernst's palm. You kept it alive. You should keep it now. Ernst's throat tightened. Then I will polish it and bring it back when the hospital is finished. Reed smiled. It is finished. Ernst shook his head. Not yet. Forgiveness has longer work to do. Late that night, after everyone left, Reed walked alone through the quiet halls. He paused outside the children's ward, listening to the steady rhythm of machines breathing for those still recovering. He thought of how the building had changed, how men who once shot at each other now built together, how mercy had spread like light down the corridors. He found Ernst asleep in a chair beside the pump he'd built, grease still on his hands. On the table beside him lay a scrap of paper with a single line written in careful English. A hospital is proof that life keeps saying yes. Reed smiled, folded the note, and placed it in his pocket. The next morning, he wrote a letter to the War Department requesting that Ernst be granted permanent residency. He ended it with a single sentence. This man has done more for American lives in peace than most of us did in war. By autumn, the hospital walls gleamed with new paint, and the brass plate outside read, Reed Weiss Memorial Wing, dedicated to healing without borders. At the dedication, local reporters asked what inspired the name. Reed pointed to the crowd and said, because it takes two men to build one heart. The applause that followed wasn't loud, it was warm, like the first breath after a long fever. Autumn, 1948, Austin, Texas. The auditorium of St. David's Medical College shimmered with polished brass and cigarette smoke. Doctors in pressed uniforms filled the front rows, their medals gleaming under the stage lights. Behind them sat nurses, students, and reporters scribbling in notebooks. At the podium stood Dr. Jonathan Reed, now 50, posture straight but voice softened by something the war hadn't taken. Compassion. Gentlemen, he began, we talk of advances in surgery, of precision and progress, but the real miracle of medicine is not in what our hands do, it's in what our hearts remember to allow. He paused. In the second row, Ernst Weiss sat beside the governor's aide, dressed in a plain gray suit, a small American flag pinned to his lapel. 2 years ago, Reed continued, I found myself rebuilding a hospital with the help of a man I once called my prisoner. I'd treated his wounds in Tunisia in 1943, never expecting to see him again. But when we met in Texas, he helped me build something better than walls or wards. He helped me build peace. A murmur swept the room. Some recognized the name from the newspaper. The German engineer who helped save Texas children. Reed lifted a small brass clamp from his pocket. The same one that had passed between them 3 times now. The light caught on its surface. This little piece of metal once closed an artery on the battlefield, he said. Today it reminds me that even broken things can hold a pulse. 2 months earlier, Brazos County Memorial Hospital. The morning sun poured through the windows of the new East Wing. The smell of disinfectant mingled with blooming magnolia. Ernst moved slowly along the hallway, his arm in a sling after a work accident. A falling beam had grazed his shoulder. Reed had insisted he rest, but Ernst, as usual, ignored the order. I'm fine, he said when Reed caught him. The nail missed my heart. Barely, Reed replied dryly. And stop calling me sir. It's Jonathan now. Ernst smiled. Hard habit to break. They walked together toward the new children's ward. Nurses moved between beds with soft voices. A young boy waved from his cot, braces on both legs. Mr. Weiss, he called. Mama says I can walk again by Christmas. Ernst grinned. Then we'll race to the door. Reed watched the exchange with quiet pride. You ever notice, he said, the people who were supposed to be enemies are the ones teaching everyone else how to live again? Ernst chuckled. That's because peace needs engineers too. November 1948. Naturalization hearing, Houston. The courthouse smelled faintly of paper and dust. Ernst stood before the judge, hat in hand. Reed sat in the back, quietly observing. State your full name, the clerk said. Ernst Friedrich Weiss. And do you swear allegiance to the United States of America, renouncing all former allegiance to any foreign power? Ernst hesitated just a moment. Yes. But may I keep allegiance to mercy as well? The room chuckled. The judge smiled. That's one allegiance we could use more of. Welcome home, Mr. Weiss. When the session ended, Reed met him in the corridor. So, Citizen Weiss, how does it feel? Ernst laughed softly, like breathing for the first time. Reed handed him a small envelope. Don't open it yet. Wait until you get back to the hospital. Inside, when Ernst finally did open it, was a single card. U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. Official staff appointment. Position, Assistant Engineer, Brazos County Memorial Hospital. Authorized by Dr. Jonathan L. Reed. Ernst traced the words with his finger, eyes shining. Christmas Eve, 1948 snow, a rarity in Texas, drifted like dust over the rooftops. The hospital glowed with strings of white lights. Nurses hummed carols while patients gathered around the tree in the lobby. Reed stood near the fireplace, watching the reflection of the flames on the brass plaque newly mounted on the wall. The Reed Weiss Wing, built on forgiveness. 1948, Ernst joined him, holding 2 mugs of coffee. Do you think people will believe this story 50 years from now? Reed smiled. They don't need to believe it. They just need to repeat it. The choir began singing Silent Night in the next room. Some of the older German workers joined in, their accents blending seamlessly with the Texans. The sound rose like a single voice carried by faith rather than nationality. Ernst leaned against the mantel, eyes distant. You know, I used to wonder if I'd ever earn the right to call this country home. You earned it the moment you built a machine to save a child, Reed said quietly. Ernst shook his head. That machine was just gears. What healed her was what you taught me. That compassion is not a weakness. Reed turned toward him. And you taught me something too. That forgiveness isn't a gesture. It's an engine. You have to keep it running. They laughed softly, the firelight flickering between them like a heartbeat. April 1949. Chicago Medical Symposium. The 2 men sat on stage before a banner reading, Postwar Medicine, Healing the Human Spirit. Reed delivered a short address about the moral responsibility of doctors in peace. When the moderator asked if the war had changed how he practiced medicine, Reed gestured toward Ernst. Yes, he said. It taught me that the body isn't the only thing that can go septic. So can the soul, if it's never cleaned of hate. The audience fell silent. One young surgeon in the front row wrote the line verbatim. Years later, it would appear in medical ethics textbooks. After the lecture, a reporter approached. Dr. Reed, one last question. What's the hardest thing you ever had to rebuild? Reed glanced at Ernst, then said simply, Trust. Summer, 1951. Brazos County Memorial Hospital. Texas, the hospital had expanded again. 2 new wings, a courtyard garden, and a small stone fountain at its center. Reed's hair had gone gray at the temples. Ernst had a permanent streak of white from the scar near his shoulder. One afternoon, as they walked through the courtyard, Ernst stopped by the fountain. The inscription on the base was one Reed hadn't approved, because Ernst had carved it secretly. Mercy is medicine, Reed laughed when he saw it. You really couldn't resist, could you? Ernst smiled. Every building needs a diagnosis. Reed sat on the fountain's edge, resting his hands on his knees. You ever think about how this all started? A gunshot, a field, 2 strangers on opposite sides, and one choice, Ernst said. You chose to see a man instead of a uniform. I chose to live up to that. Reed nodded slowly. Strange how one act of mercy can echo this long. It must, Ernst said. Otherwise, the world forgets how to start over. 10 years later, 1958. The Veterans Hospital had grown into a teaching institution. Its motto, carved above the entrance, came from Reed's own notes. Where healing has no enemies. Reed, now retired, spent his mornings walking the gardens, greeting patients and young interns. He carried a cane but rarely used it. Ernst still worked in maintenance, his tools as precise as his memory. One morning, Reed found him tightening a bolt near the children's swing set. You never stop fixing things, do you? Reed teased. Ernst smiled. Not when they still move. Reed sat on a bench nearby, eyes on the horizon. I've been writing a letter, he said. To who? To whoever inherits this place. I want them to know why we built it the way we did. Ernst nodded. Then write it simple. The way you talk to a patient. Reed took a deep breath. That's the plan. The letter. August 1958, to the next doctor who walks these halls. You will meet people who remind you of the worst stories you've ever heard. Treat them anyway. You will be asked to close wounds that were not yours to make. Stitch them anyway. Remember, medicine is not about who deserves care. It's about who needs it. In 1943, I saved a man the world told me to hate. In 1947, he helped me save 100 more. And in doing so, he healed me. Forgiveness, I've learned, is the longest surgery, and the only one worth repeating. Jonathan L. Reed, MD Epilogue, Spring 1962A. Nurse found the letter framed on the wall of the Reed Weiss wing, beside the brass clamp and a black and white photo of the two men standing before the hospital's dedication stone. Reed had passed peacefully the previous winter. Ernst, now gray and stooped, came every Sunday to polish the plaque. He would whisper, "Still running, old friend," and touch the clamp for luck. The children who played in the garden never knew which one had been the prisoner and which had been the doctor. They only knew that both had built the place that cured them. And when the bell over the main gate rang each morning to open the wards, it sounded less like steel and more like breathing, steady, faithful, alive. Moral epilogue. The war had created surgeons to stop bleeding, but peace demanded something harder, surgeons who could mend hearts. At Brazos County Memorial, two men once divided by flags rebuilt more than a hospital. They rebuilt the meaning of healing itself.